Okay, and next up on our BSECS coverage, we have Amy Wilson, a PhD student from the University of Exeter. Amy, welcome. We basically did this interview last night, except we didn't have microphones. We just kind of had a very interesting, I would call it nerdy chat about maternity. Give our folks a sense of what your work is looking at.
Thank you very much. Yes, my work is looking at clothing from the 18th century for pregnancy. So what I'm really interested in is how women of the past achieved a level of comfort and also represented their ideals of motherhood and who they felt how they should look and how they should present their bodies while they were pregnant. I'm looking at women who were very elite, so they were choosing clothing from with a pretty much unlimited budget, and got inspiration from a surprising collection of places. Some of the women that I look at were dressing in the style of rural peasants, recreating aprons and pastoral style clothing in silk and dressing a little bit like a shepherdess while pregnant. And that really connected with ideas of the ideal mother figure, this idea of a pure and nurturing mother. It really sort of connected in with that idea of Rousseau and the sort of maternal ideal. But it was also a very practical way to dress a pregnant body because you could adapt components of it to fit as the body grew. But I'm also looking at inspiration that came from other countries and other parts of the world. And I'm also very interested in how clothing from other parts of the British Empire made their way into Britain through maternity clothing. So inspiration coming from the Caribbean, from India, from modern day Turkey, and the clothing often in these countries, because they're hot countries, the clothing was loose, it was light, it was quite flexible, easy to wear. So it made very useful, practical maternity clothing. But the difficulty with that, or what's I suppose maybe slightly unpalatable or curious to a modern audience, is the cultural appropriation and the problematic side to that sort of type of dressing. It's something that the women themselves at the time wouldn't have seen it that way. They'd have seen it as quite fashionable, exciting, reminiscent of foreign climes and cultures and countries that they perhaps had never been to, and just sort of existed in their imagination or in literature. And in material culture, of course. So that's some of the things that I'm excited about researching and that I'm writing about at the moment.
And one of the things we spent about a solid 15 minutes talking about last night was stigmas around the depiction of pregnant women and this sort of trend, perhaps is the wrong word, but I'm going to go with trend, of if you're having your portrait done, not being depicted pregnant. And we were having a discussion, weren't we, about, on the one hand, perhaps that makes some sense, because if you're having your portrait done, you want to look what you might perceive as your best, and if you're not thinking that you look your best when you're pregnant, then perhaps it makes sense. But then you were kind of saying, well, they were doing that earlier, so that's potentially not what's going on there. So talk our listeners through what your thoughts are on all of this.
Of course. So I think for a lot of women, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say for most women, pregnancy was a very important part of their identity. It was a key part of what they were for, in inverted commas, but it was also a large part of how they spent their time. So being painted looking pregnant, while you might think that that is only a temporary state, and perhaps today you would think that that would be the case, for someone like Queen Charlotte, she was pregnant for 16 years. A vast percentage of her adult life was wrapped up in her maternal experience. And so it meant that for her, actually, pregnancy was a big part of who she was and how she lived. Yet there are no portraits that I know of, and I've been looking for a long time, that show her actually looking pregnant. That we know from the dates that she was pregnant during a lot of the portraits that were painted of her, but she doesn't look it. And that means that we don't have that record. It's harder to know. It's harder to know how she was dressing, what she was choosing to wear, but
the joys of podcasting live.
Absolutely.
If people are wondering why the camera angle keeps changing, it's because I'm trying to keep people out of shot so that they don't get recorded without consent. But sorry, you carry on.
So that means that we don't know exactly what Queen Charlotte did look like when she was pregnant, even though it was a big part of her identity and a big part of how she spent her life. What we do have, curiously, is a lot of examples of pregnancy in satirical prints. So while women generally didn't choose to be painted in a portrait looking pregnant, even though they possibly were pregnant, you get a far more representation of bodies that sort of look pregnant in satire, and it's because, generally speaking, that the pregnancy is part of the story, and so for that reason, sometimes you get pregnancies that look incredibly unrealistic. Massive bump, sometimes even a bump that's bigger than the woman, where you're really sort of focusing on I suppose the idea in some of the prints. There's one in particular of the Duchess of Kent pregnant with Queen Victoria, and it's almost like the magnitude of the baby that she's carrying has made the bump artificially large, because she was conceived at a time when there was this need for an heir to the British throne, and so that particular print is very, very, very clearly showing a very pregnant woman.
I think what's coming through really clearly as well is your heritage background in all of this, in sort of the way that you're approaching source material, the way that you're thinking about some of these things. So just tell us a little bit about what you were doing before your PhD.
Of course, yes. So before my PhD, I was working in the heritage industry. I've worked in museums and historic houses for many years. And one of the ways that I started looking at this project, I started thinking about pregnancy in the past, was looking at museum collections and thinking about maternal bodies, or the absence of maternal bodies in museum costume collections, and that while you might find that maybe that would be understandable in a design-led museum, somewhere like the V&A, where they are depicting the dress as a design object. But other museums that are about the lives of women, perhaps it would be good to see examples of maternal bodies in museums. It's something that we're seeing more and more. And there's a lady called Janet Wood who's published about mannequins and mounting of historic dress, and so that is opening up the question of not just pregnancy, but depicting costume and bodies of all sorts of different shapes and sizes and appearance, types of appearance in the museum world.
I am so tempted to go off on a rabbit hole about pregnant mannequins and the habits in the past of just sort of pinning a pillow to a fundamentally a male mannequin and all the rest of it. But we, in the interest of keeping vox-pop short and the fact that it's a busy conference and you've got other places to be, we will cut it short there. Just end by letting our listeners know where they can find out more about you and your research.
Thank you very much. So you can find out about my research on my website, which is amywilsonstory.com. And you can read some of my papers there and just find out a little bit more about my research. I'm hoping that all of this will be in a fabulous new book in the not too distant future.
Well, we look forward to it. Amy, massive kudos for dealing with all of the audio issues, the wacky camera angles, and thank you so much for sharing your research with us.
Thank you.
Folks, do me a favour. Go and review the show. Do it right now. 5 stars, please, and a comment, crucially. It takes you seconds, but it sends the algorithm wild and catapults us up the rankings. It's the most powerful thing you can do to support the hours of content that we provide for free. Love the show? Never want to miss the latest news? Sign up to our newsletter. The link is in the description, and get regular Napoleonic bulletins direct to your inbox. Looking for a present for the Napoleonicist in your life? We have a shop packed with Napoleonic Wars Pod merch. Check out the link in the description. And did you know you can now gift people subscriptions to the Patreon perks we offer? So, if you want to treat someone to our online course, exclusive Meet the Author sessions, green room access to recordings, and exclusive episodes, head to patreon.com/napwarspod to find out more. Much love to all our Patreon supporters who are enjoying a rejuvenated and revitalized offering of perks on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the Napoleonic Wars Pod to find out how you can join a buzzing community of like-minded Napoleonic nerds who are enjoying things like courses, socials, book clubs, green room access to recordings, early releases, exclusive episodes, and much, much more. Their support is empowering us to triple our output and keep you entertained with Napoleonic nerdery on a near daily basis. Prices start from just £2 a month. So if you can spare the cost of a cup of coffee each month to support us, it would mean a huge amount and might even fund some documentary work. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in mid-January 2024, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier: Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramus, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon-Smith, Roland Shark, Giovanni, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlen, Darla Vincent, Peter Findley, Jeff Maple, Ian Harding, Indiana Fats, Joe Ayres, Robin Brasher, Daniel Friedman, and Jonathan Willets. The Admirals: John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, David Maxwell, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Moran, and Tim Pritchard. The Chiefs of Staff: Adam Coslin, the Marshals: Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser, the Legion of Scholars: Dan Hazelwood and Bob Burnham, and in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire Todd Campbell and the Duke of Wellington Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, Josh, and Zoe, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.